Roswana will now introduce our final speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Nair.
Dr. Nair is a CEO, Principal Psychologist of Work and Health Psychologist. Dr. Nair has extensive experience over the last 10 years conducting workplace wellness workshops. She has also published numerous articles and recently authored a work on work stress, mortality, and happiness. Let us welcome Dr. Nair to the stage, please.
Thank you for the introduction. And thank you, all of you Brazilian people who are here for the last hour on Friday. I'm pleased to be here to present today on the topic of, is the illusion of control the commonality for psychological well-being across populations? Imagine that heart is pumping, okay? What does psychological well-being entail? Is it distinct from physical health and whether or not one is disease-free? The research findings that regular physical exercise acts to ameliorate the negative effects of stressful life demands indicates that the body-mind connection is strong and unequivocal. So working on physical fitness helps us towards a clearer mind, and many of our speakers have touched on this point. What are the building blocks for psychological wellness? Based on longitudinal, cross-sectional, and correlational studies, several factors have been identified as contributory. For a start, one needs to attain the baseline factors in Maslow's needs hierarchy. This means we need to have enough resources to feed and clothe ourselves, have shelter, and be safe. Social support is a big factor in engendering and sustaining a sense of engagement in interpersonal interaction. The East African Zulu greeting, Sawubona, translates to I see you. It means I'm here, but it's more encompassing to convey to the observer that you feel you have been seen and understood, and that your personal dignity has been recognized. Household pets, especially dogs, play an important therapeutic role, especially to fill a void when human connectedness and social support are not readily available. Does psychological well-being mean that one is happy? Several speakers have talked about happiness. What is happiness? Is it not transient, fleeting emotion that can well disappear when we begin to ask ourselves the question, am I happy? Is it the physiological activity of oxytocin, the love hormone, or serotonin, the pleasure chemical neurotransmitter in our system that we can turn on by eating chocolate? Or is psychological well-being to do with being at peace, having a sense of being grounded, a feeling of mental stability and acceptance of life as is, being able to face whatever and say to ourselves with equanimity, it is what it is. The capacity to accept the good and the bad. And how can one achieve such a sense of calmness and composure in difficult situations and challenges that we may face? Imagine the fishes swimming around. Is it an inborn trait or a learned behavior? This is where personality theory and research come in to answer these questions. Yes, we vary on the dimension of being easily stressed stressed out with change and challenges on a continuum to a capacity to keep our heads during a crisis. And yet, that is not the whole story. Nature only contributes about 50% towards this personality trait. The remaining 50% is contributed by nurture, the natural and social environment we experience from the time in the womb as babies and toddlers, through childhood and the teenage years, to life as young adults, through to middle age and beyond. Does the state of psychological well-being change over time and in different contexts? Can we measure this as we do other abstract psychological constructs? If we agree on an operational definition of psychological well-being, what would be defining components of such a measure? Would it be a unitary measure or a composite, then compiled together in an operationally defined structure? A 2016 publication in The Counseling Psychologist by Cook, Melchert, and Connor listed 42 instruments varying in psychometric properties and length that operationally defined psychological well-being. Since then, the list is likely to have increased. The remit of this plenary address is to understand with as much clarity as can be mustered the conceptual and philosophical and ultimately the behavioral aspects of psychological well-being. To see and understand the whole elephant rather than mistake the head, the tail, the body, or the legs for the whole animal. Behavioral indicators such as physical symptoms of negative stress and arousal, hypervigilance, sleep disturbances, digestive problems, difficulties in focusing and concentration, recurrent nightmares and ruminating are possible outcome measures of the state of health and functioning of the elephant called psychological well-being. Such indicators do not define what the elephant is. The understanding of the elephant called psychological well-being must be from the realm of an abstract construct. What is the nature of this abstract construct? If it is not a measure of physical functioning, emotional state, or chemical balance in our brain, what is the likely nature? The remit of this plenary address is to examine a possible answer to the question of how to understand the nature of psychological well-being. The objective is to be able to translate such an understanding so that it can have application value across different populations, across different target groups who differ in physical health and illness, mental capacity, and daily challenges faced. 4 different populations are examined. First is the active workforce, who self-report stress and burnout over the years, faced with increasing demands on their time at work and in their personal lives, such that rest and recuperation may be compromised. The second group are family members who live through the experience of an unexpected terminal illness in their family. The third group examined are women diagnosed with breast cancer. The last group is comprised of members of the aging population faced with debilitating physical and cognitive challenges. And these are the 4 groups that I have worked with over the last many years. Is the element of control the single commonality across these populations that can render psychological well-being? This is a question that will be addressed. So we look at work-related burnout and breakdown, the role of control in this, and in the recovery to psychological well-being. There is no consensus on what constitutes job burnout. The most commonly used instrument is a Maslach burnout inventory. 3 dimensions have been yielded for this inventory in large-scale factorial studies conducted in different countries over the years from the 1980s. Burnout has been reported most recently by Later and Maslach, 2016, to comprise of the 3 dimensions of exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficiency. Beginning with the first stage of imbalance between demands or stressors and available resources to meet the demands. The second stage is characterized by depersonalization and cynicism as a means of defensive coping. The third stage is one of reduced personal accomplishment. There are several ways to address this situation. Work-related coaching is usually approached from the perspective of personalized, one-on-one, confidential conversations between the coach and the employee or organizational leader. Beginning with a big picture perspective taking to attain a better understanding of the unique dynamics impacting on the coachee. So the earlier sessions will focus on the presenting needs of the individual, the physical and social environment at work, home, and outside of these 2 parameters. An accurate depiction of how the individual spends his time on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis is articulated at the 24/7 week log capture. The coachee is then invited to reflect on what is really important for him. This may prove to be a challenge for employees who often report they had never thought about the answers to that question. Often, they assume that what they want in life is really to be like the wealthiest people who can buy whatever they want and be able to show up with luxury items, take vacations whenever they please, and generally live a life of leisure and freedom from constraints of reporting to a boss and being accountable for unmet deadlines or poor quality work output. With regard to values, the unexamined mind is everywhere in the workforce. When eventually the stressed out employee is able to consider what is really important for him, again, it is often articulated in behavioral language with a relative time duration built in. And I'm not talking about Maithili's focus group people. It's the people who come in for therapy because they are burned out. So at this point, he's able to say, I should be spending more time with my family. I am missing out on my children growing up. My wife is upset that I do not have time to pay attention to her, as our keynote speaker said. Sometimes it is also, I want to be able to do better work, but I don't seem able to overcome the challenges I face. Some are eventually able to cross over to the realm of abstract thinking and conceptualize and identify values by name as aspects they recognize as an integral part of their preferred self-identity. The majority of the stressed out workforce who are candidates for burnout have never articulated in their self-talk about their personal identity. I am honest, reliable, responsible, though they are likely to be aware that these attributes are valued by employers and family and friends. At a personal level, both at work and outside of work, attributes such as being lovable, patient, and kind go a long, long way to establishing and maintaining good interpersonal relationships, which helps to smoother and accelerated more effective functioning in all high-demand workplace settings. Then, of course, they'll turn around and say, how do I become lovable? Question you may ask yourself as well. Manifestation and evidence of such personal attributes elicit cooperation and good teamwork without a need for coercive, authoritarian high-handedness. A caring workplace environment is unlikely to yield a crop of burnt-out employees. Instead, because of engagement, there is intrinsic motivation to commit to a good quality output. A different scenario is presented by Bakker and Costa, 2014, who write about chronic burnout as a dynamic process of a loss spiral for the individual employee who plays a role in self-undermining. The work and organizational psychology researchers make out a case for the employee assuming responsibility for his predicament, in contrast to the employer or the government or someone else. This is in contrast to expecting that the employer or some other policy-making agency needs to step in to address the burnout syndrome for the individual employee. This brings to the fore the central and crucial role that the construct of taking control of one's life can play in the situation of workplace burnout. Executive coaching for the employee then moves in the recovery trajectory to invite the employee to literally take control of his life by planning the 24/7 time allocation to reflect that how his time is allocated pays heed to what he really values as most dear at this stage in his life, and that is attended to. It is emphasized that he has a choice and he can choose an alternative that is less preferred because it is a necessity to meet the needs of his own dearly held values and concepts and relationships. And some of these could be, I need to pay the bills for my family. In this way, a sense of control and choice is emphasized. This is opposite from the self-depiction of a hopeless, helpless victim of workplace burnout syndrome. If he decides to work longer hours, it is because he has exercised the choice to do so, and not as a helpless victim of the uncaring organization or boss. When it is clear to the burned out employee that he does have the capacity to choose how he allocates his time 24/7, then that lifts him out from the downward spiral of ineffective work and feelings of depression. Moving on to look at an unexpected terminal illness of a family member and the role of control in this. How and when can a person recover to psychological well-being? When the diagnosis of terminal illness and the dying process is protracted, the impact on young children can be varied, especially so when medical interventions yield additional years before the end stage. Children can display erratic, noisy, unruly behavior, siblings quarreling and engaging in physical altercations, acting disobedient to parents, generally acting in rebellious, defiant, uncivil behavior. The explanation lies in the attention deprivation they are likely to have suffered, as attention over the years is focused on the parent who is ill and needs continuing physical and emotional support. Older parents who lose an adult son or daughter experience a sense of guilt, thinking it should have been their turn to move on. There is a deep desire to have the choice to move on in place of their child, and a sense of frustration that they cannot do this. The case study of why a handsome and highly intelligent and capable young man will help to illustrate how he finally arrived at a place of psychological well-being following the traumatic experience of living with his father, who died at home some years after a terminal illness diagnosis. Y is an only child, and he was in an emotionally close and loving relationship with both his parents. He was outgoing, played sport, was popular with his peers, and was also staunch in his religious faith and practice. His father, an active, creative, temperamentally easygoing businessman, suffered a major stroke and was no longer able to work and manage his business. Y's mother, who had worked alongside her husband throughout, then took over the running of their family business. Subsequently, the father was diagnosed with a medical condition that posted a lifespan of no more than 6 months. He actually lived a further 2 years. During those years, he was cogent, in pain, was mostly wheelchair-bound, and suffered several episodes of respiratory crisis. During the years that his father was homebound, Y tried to be away as much as possible, out of the house. He continued with his studies, then would go and play sport and hang out with his friends. He was reluctant to return home and witness the physical challenges his father was facing as an invalid. The day his father died, he was actually at home. He had spent time sitting with his father, talking about their shared interest in sports and the success and good reputation of their family business. The last day spent with his father was counted as a gift and a blessing by Y. However, within a year of his father's death, Y started displaying symptoms of vicarious or secondary post-traumatic stress disorder, manifested in several ways. He found himself suffering episodes of sharp chest pain, fainting, and in a state of panic. He became afraid of leaving his bedroom. On his first visit to my consultancy, Y was accompanied by his mother, as he was too anxious to commute on his own. He had at that time become a virtual recluse in his bedroom. Y expressed a strong desire to reclaim his life. As he said, he had wasted too many years and was missing out on really living. The interventions conducted over a 4-month period yielded an almost immediate rebound Y was euphoric in the first month. He left his room, ate his meals in the living room, left the house, and took public transport on his own, and was able to physically be at his workplace to meet with managers. In the second month of therapy, he started again to experience occasional chest pains with no positive medical indications. After several episodes of bouncing back and forth, Y actually interviewed for and was engaged in another job, which he said paid him well beyond his expectations and included some overseas travel. He was able to manage his anxiety of meeting new people and execute his job such that the senior management was impressed and wanted to accelerate his promotion. The one consistent message conveyed to Y throughout the initial 4 therapeutic months of difficult conversations, once or twice a week, was a message that he had a choice of whether or not he was going to take control of his life. He was highly motivated to turn his life around. With strong family support from his mother and good friends, he has to date taken control of his life and turned it around. Moving on to a diagnosis of breast cancer, an area I've worked with over the last 7 years. The role of control in this, and how to attain psychological well-being. A diagnosis of breast cancer is usually met with trepidation and anxiety that this is a death knell, and this is the most common form of cancer experienced by women here. Depending on the stage of the cancer, the medical interventions required, and the social support they receive, breast cancer survivors experience a range of reactions, including fear, anger, anxiety, confusion, bitterness, as well as positive reactions like gratitude, relief, and a focus on what is really important for them in their lives. Over time, after successful treatment, many return to their daily lives as best they can. The anxiety returns when the time for the regular medical checkup comes around, until the results confirm that they are once more disease-free. In the case of breast cancer, apart from gene mutations leading to a possibly higher risk of BRCA1 and BRCA2, there is little peer-reviewed medical research consensus to date on the impact of environmental, lifestyle, or dietary habits on the occurrence or otherwise of breast cancer. Increasingly, treatment for breast cancer has been administered to young women aged 26 years and upwards, and even to teenage girls as young as 14 years. Personal communication by an oncologist in 2016. The women come from diverse backgrounds across socioeconomic strata, different ethnicities and age bands, single and married, homemakers and career women, virgins, mothers and grandmothers. Dietary habits vary from vegan, vegetarian, to white and red meat consumers. Those who imbibe alcohol, be it beer, wine, or spirits, and many others who do not consume alcohol at all. Some of the women diagnosed with breast cancer were especially resentful that they had led what is generally considered a healthy lifestyle, including regular exercise and a vegetarian diet, and they still developed breast cancer. In the face of such a scenario, it becomes professionally unethical to prescribe a lifestyle regime and nutritional and dietary habits with a prognosis that this could prevent the occurrence or reoccurrence of breast cancer. So what does the psychology research inform about the belief that one can actually have control over the occurrence of breast cancer? Tomic and Hagelson, 2006, published an article in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology titled Cognitive Adaptation Theory in Breast Cancer Recurrence, Are There Limits? Their sample measures on optimism and self-esteem were highly correlated, R 0.71. However, belief in control over recurrence of breast cancer was only weakly correlated with self-esteem, R 0.32, and optimism, R 0.27. For women who remain disease-free, beliefs about control over recurrence of the breast cancer was unrelated to physical and mental health. However, for women who experienced a recurrence, beliefs about control over recurrence of the breast cancer was associated with a decline in physical and mental health, as compared with women who did not share a belief about control over the reoccurrence. So these findings support the contention that there may be limitations or boundary conditions on perceptions of personal control. An important boundary condition is the controllability of the situation, Folkman, 1984, or the likelihood of being able to achieve a desired outcome, Berger, 1989. However, there is much to be said to promote a healthy lifestyle regime amongst breast cancer survivors. A lifestyle that prioritizes time allocation to what is valued most, to adequate sleep, regular exercise, and a diet that staves off cardiovascular and endocrinological disorders and protects the musculoskeletal structure. A life that is spent in actualizing their dreams and life goals and creating happy experiences with loved ones on a daily basis. Such a lifestyle that is considered deliberative and mindful would then have them be in control of the choices they make. Such choices would then go a long way to promote psychological well-being. The occurrence or otherwise of breast cancer then is relegated to another life event that may or may not happen. However, the breast cancer survivor can exercise control over the quality of life they lead on a daily basis. Moving on to aging and related debilitating physical and cognitive challenges, and the role of control in how psychological well-being can be attained. With aging, the concomitant features are generalized physical and cognitive decline and deterioration. This is part of the normal aging process. In many instances, aging and the prospect of decline in physical and mental capacity is met with trepidation and denial. On many occasions, young and older adults voice a desire for an earlier death so they would not have to experience the undesirable challenges of aging. Provision for and access to funds to finance medical requirements is important for all aging adults, especially if they were receiving regular remuneration in paid employment as the only source of income. Once they are retired from their paying job, they need to have access to savings or other funding sources to pay their bills and maintain the basic level in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The onset of chronic ailments, failing eyesight and hearing loss, dental challenges, osteoporosis, rheumatic pains are some of the common presenting medical issues by older adults. The work routines of getting up early and dressing up to go to work, engaging with others at the workplace, being required to fulfill certain roles and carry out specific duties, interaction and communication with several people, en route to work and back and at the workplace, all come to a standstill on retirement from work. Within a matter of months, this turns into a void which many find difficult to fill in a satisfactory way. So, the experience of aging process is for many people a dreaded, fearful, and unwelcome phase. Can there be psychological well-being at this time? Religious faith and practice help many through this time, as it does through other times of crisis and disease and unexpected incidents of accidents or fatalities. Faith and practice at this time serves predominantly to render a sense of handing over control of their pain and after-death fate to a higher power or powers who would ensure that they have the strength to live a life which involves suffering in some form, as well as a good post-death future. The interesting dynamics of religious faith and practice is that, in actuality, it involves the individual taking charge of his life and afterlife by referencing it to a more capable party or parties, if there is more than one deity worshipped. And this higher being is charged with ensuring that all will be well in the end, and the end will turn out well for the individual. The same end is achieved by those who believe in a just world. Kim, Nagata, and Akiyama, 2015, Elvis and Corella, 2013. The similarity of the phenomenological process is acknowledging that events may come to pass that are beyond one's locus of control. However, in the larger scheme of how the universe functions, justice will be served, and all wrongs will be set right, and the equations will balance. So, belief in a just world contributes to a sense of psychological well-being, as does the Buddhist principle, amongst others, of acceptance of things as they are, and of ourselves as we are. Beyond religious and spiritual beliefs, can there be a sense of psychological well-being during the challenging years of advancing age? The literature on happiness provides us with resources that may be utilized for this purpose. A meta-analysis of the impact of gratitude interventions on reported sense of well-being showed positive but limited promise. Vargas, Gifford et al., 2016. The authors conclude that perhaps the potential of gratitude interventions may not yet have been fully realized. Then there is a possible contribution that mindfulness could play towards enhancing well-being in the aging individual. Galler, Balin et al., 2016, signal the need for an action plan requirement to schedule and implement regular mindfulness practice. This brings to a full circle the role of the aging individual to take control in planning and implementing his daily schedule of activities, providing a structure and framework which now replaces his previous structured and constricted work-job routine. The sense of psychological well-being can be enhanced at this phase of life because of the element of more choice and flexibility in self-planning activities and time allocation for different activities. What is a given is that being a conscientious, a big 5 personality dimension, is an important component in creating psychological well-being also in the aging adult. So what is the conclusion to this examination of the role of control? Psychological well-being is reflected in the capacity to function effectively even in the face of daunting personal challenges. It is demonstrated as mental strength and courage in the face of adversity, even in the absence of physical well-being. Psychological well-being in such situations helps to focus and reflects clear thinking and effective decision-making under duress. In such scenarios, it can be understood as having a high threshold or having the capacity to function well in very stressful situations. Invictus by Ernest Henley. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I choose. Psychological well-being therefore speaks of effective functioning under duress because of the element of choice and being in control in exercising a choice. Must a working definition of well-being include a sense of joy, a sense of peace, and of acceptance of status quo? Dylan Thomas to his father, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. The choice to be angry at the situation. For psychological well-being and emotional resilience, must there be a sense of personal control and taking charge of one's life? In the 4 scenarios considered in this plenary, the physical, emotional, and social demands on the needs of the individual vary considerably. In each of these scenarios, there are environmental and physical factors that are clearly beyond the individual's capacity to control. Is a sense of personal control then also out of reach in these 4 scenarios for 4 different subject populations? Is the exercise of personal control per se necessary for psychological well-being, as discussed in the situation of the aging population, whose physical and mental facilities are on the decline, and debilitation and death are on the horizon? Making the decision to let a deity take charge or a belief in a just world serves a similar agenda. It can be said that in this context, the individual, by making that decision, has taken control of an otherwise unmanageable and highly anxiety-provoking situation. This protocol is also applicable for family members of a person diagnosed with a terminal illness, a woman diagnosed with breast cancer, or a stressed-out employee, should they recourse to a religious or spiritual or philosophical stance to self-regulate their feelings of perhaps anger, fear, anxiety, or survivor guilt. Psychological strategies offer a different way of interpreting the situation we find ourselves in. The classic admonition that one can interpret and be impacted by the perception that a glass is either half empty or half full is now passé. Instead, current research in neuroscience and the study of brain functioning points in the direction of harnessing the power of emotional agility to reframe how we view our situation and the choices that become available to us through mindful awareness. When we become aware of unconscious bias of how we think and how we become locked into habitual, ineffective ways of reacting, then we arrive at a place in our mind when we know we actually have choices. in how we choose to view any situation, free from the emotional binds that prevent us from the freedom of making deliberated and conscious decisions. Boyatzis, 2008, Boyatzis and Jack, 2018. Boyatzis was the Harvard Medical School Institute of Coaching Prize winner this year that I had the pleasure of listening to. Psychological strategies offer a different way of interpreting the situation we find ourselves in. The classic admonition that one can interpret and be impacted by the perception that a glass is either half empty or half full is now passé. Instead, current research in neuroscience and the study of brain functioning points in the direction of harnessing the power of emotional agility to reframe how we view our situation and the choices that become available to us through mindful awareness. When we become aware of unconscious bias of how we think and how we become locked into habitual, ineffective ways of reacting, then we arrive at a place in our mind when we know we actually have choices in how we choose to view any situation, free from the emotional binds that prevent us from the freedom of making deliberated and conscious decisions. Boyatzis, 2008, Boyatzis and Jack, 2018. Boyatzis was the Harvard Medical School Institute of Coaching Prize winner this year that I had the pleasure of listening to. We can move away from self-delusional thoughts that an unwelcome situation is actually a good thing, to start with a realistic self-appraisal of our actual emotions and feelings about the situation, and then moving on consciously and deliberately to look for the good in this bad. We move one step closer to taking charge and assuming control for how we regulate potentially overwhelming negative emotions. The fascinating lab results reported by Perfecto, Simmons, Gallach, and Nelson, 2017, in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, that rejecting a bad option feels like choosing a good one is a psychological strategy that can be deliberately employed as part of coping self-talk. Ultimately, our fundamental beliefs about emotions and its pervasive role in shaping our thinking, decisions, and behavior will determine whether we apply intrinsic emotion regulation for ourselves and extrinsic emotion regulation to others. Ford and Gross, 2018, spell out 4 steps in this process, as first identifying the need to regulate emotion, second, selecting regulation strategies, third, implementing regulation, and finally, monitoring regulation success. It is a thrust of this plenary address that across populations and subject groups, as illustrated by the discussion of the 4 selected groups, emotion regulation and resilience is harnessed with the perception that we exercise choice in every context. That choice in an admittedly severely bad situation could be the choice to be miserable. This is my party and I can choose to cry if I want to. Recast this to, I'm making the choice of how I want to feel about this right now. I choose. I'm in control. This is true individual freedom of choice. I may be unable to change the situation, however, I can choose how I'm going to respond to this. This choice can also be non-acceptance, even anger. So long as I can choose, I'm in control. This is the reality and not an illusion, and therefore I'm in a good place. Prescribed as psychological well-being distinct from physical health or wealth. Therefore, the counterintuitive and distinct contribution of this paper is that one can be in a state of psychological well-being and emotional resilience even when the acknowledged emotion is one of sadness or anger or frustration with the situation. The key is a cognition that one is consciously and deliberately exercising a choice to acknowledge and express these feelings. That is reality and no illusion. I choose to fight or to yield or to let it be, and it is well. I am at peace with myself. Thank you for your attention. We have about 8 minutes before they close the lights, so there can be Q&A, questions.
Well, thank you for this beautiful, well-spoken essay. It's about psychological well-being, and well, in this last slide you show that well-being is not necessarily well-feeling, but most people will see the term psychological well-being as being good and feeling good. Isn't the term lifeability a better word for describing what you told us?
I'm not sure what lifeability would entail.
Lifeability would entail the things you describe, that you're realistic, that you cope where it's possible, but that you also realize that sometimes you cannot solve the problem.
Yeah, I think though, having thought in some depth about the scenarios, about the people that I work with, that the strategy that worked best for them to feel at peace was that they chose. They chose what they were going to do. And the choice and what came through was being in control. Even if they couldn't change the situation, I choose. So not so much, I don't know, that is a new word to me, but psychological well-being, I can tease out the difference. That you can be strong, resilient, even when the situation even when the situation is bad and you can't change it. It's still going to be all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I just barely caught a comment about how a person might construe involvement with a deity, somebody like God involved in their life.
Sorry, will you repeat?
Yes.
Somebody would construe...
The involvement of something like a supernatural deity like God in their lives as a source of control rather than something like a threat to their own control. Is that how you see it?
No.
Okay.
No. You know, that's a very interesting point about religious belief and control.
Yes.
That if the religious belief that sustains and nurtures is, I cannot change the situation, so I'm going to leave it to God, okay? That person is likely to be more resilient and mentally okay than someone who says, I will pray and I will get what I want. That person will be like those whose boundary conditions were flawed. And there are clearly people who fall into either category in terms of how they pray.
Yes, and I've done some research as well showing that a sort of hybrid approach whereby a person does as much as they can and then leaves the rest to God is perhaps the most...
Yes, God helps
adaptive.
those who help themselves.
Yes.
That's,
Thank you.